guys, welcome back to Within the Cauldron. I'm Nico, and this is my co-host Chrissy, and we have Petrofan Andros here from the Church of Witchcraft.
And welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it.
Right. So, Andros, can you tell us how did you start this church?
Back in 2020, during the whole pandemic stuff that was going on, I went through the standard requisite kind of phase that everybody went through, the depression phase, where you just sort of shut down and freak out and just play Skyrim for 30 days. And then from there, I kind of got back together, and then I was like, what is it that I see that isn't happening that I would wish would be in existence? And that's kind of comes from also the rededication I had done at that time for myself as a witch. And I didn't have anybody to celebrate with or just to share that moment with. So that part combined with the pandemic and the needs of that weren't really being met, that is what inspired me to start the Church of Witchcraft.
I love that. Yeah, we had a lot of digital churches and things show up during that time period. And they've been very successful too, which has been great. Let's see. So with your church, do you guys have meetings as far as, besides like the Sabbats, do you guys hold regular services, or is it just Sabbath rituals you do?
We do a collection of different things, and part of that is part of we have to play the game. We live in the American culture and society, and they expect certain things to argue your position or your stance as an organization, specifically a religious one. But also it gives us some continuity for witches in general, because there's not really been a congregation that I'm aware of. I mean, there's been Wiccan churches, and they do exist, but where Wiccans aren't concerned, if you're a witch that isn't Wiccan, well, then what happens? You usually get absorbed into kind of an errant earth church, maybe, that kind of encapsulates several things. So it wasn't anything really specific. So with ours, we really try to focus on what is witchcraft from kind of a broad brush approach. And we do Asbots, and we also do Sabbats. So we have a full moon and a dark moon. Our dark moons are virtual right now, and they're hosted by a priestess, Gwen. And those we've been enjoying some good attendance there, and there's a variety of different things we do. The Sabbats vary, but those do pop up pretty frequently. We have a tea party in Grosdara. That's usually pretty big. And then we have the Chronicles, which is kind of, since witches don't have confession, we needed a way for people to feel comfortable reaching out to clergy members as well, and finding a place to do that without having to have the awkward moment of, how do I ask for help? And it's just like, this is a time that we can split out and talk about that. It's also held virtually, so the Chronicles are accessible to everybody. And we want to keep in mind accessibility, because some people can't travel or have some mitigating physical, symptoms that might be going on for them, or they may be in a town that doesn't facilitate paganism super greatly. So the Chronicles happen the first Wednesday of every month. We have the Asbots full and dark moon. We have Sabbats usually, and then we also host a sermon every month. So I have an hour-long sermon that I do that's on a variety of different witchcraft topics that are broad versus one specific doctrine.
Okay. Let's see. And then the church is structured a little bit differently than contemporary pagan circles or covens. Can you tell us how you landed on your structure? As far as
structure, yeah, that was again, we borrowed ladder. We borrow everything. A lot of that happens. A lot of collaboration. We wanted terms that were accessible and understandable, so we didn't have to re-explain everything, because we already have to explain how did you get a Church of Witches together, because church and witch doesn't always connect very well for some people, especially those with some of the past difficulties and past religions they might be part of, that sort of thing. We wanted to recapture that term for broader use. So hence why I went with church. Our structure was related to, again, the American game, that they were like, you have to have a clear hierarchical structure of some kind. To combat some of this and sort of cultish behavior. All religion started as a cult, in my opinion. But to assuage some of that, I'm not just given this title, right? I took the title and I have a period of 7 years. So this role is only a 7-year role, and then I have to rerun basically for this position. And if I'm doing well, we can run forever as long as people keep selecting us to do it, right? So it's how we serve the community, and the members that are in good standing, that have membership with us, then they have the right to that vote of who they want in their synod, the cardinals and myself, to see if they want us to keep running the church. We're doing an okay job. So that way they have a say in how their church is run, not just by random divine decree.
Okay. Let's see here. Here's a good one. Regarding your personal journey, did you study under anybody specific or adhere to a tradition before you started the church?
Oh, that's a really long. I'll try and truncate that. So my mother has always been spiritual, but in looking back in retrospect, it was definitely a lot of witchcraft. She just didn't call it as such. So neo-spiritualism of the early 90s would be the best way I would phrase that. So 5 or 6 years old, I was exposed to various divination methods, tarot, pendulum, rune reading, that kind of thing, meditation techniques, that kind of thing, for pretty much all of my life. I was encouraged to look at these and explore as I should wish. That fast forward, I also, fascinatingly enough, some of my structure probably comes from my experience in private Christian education. So I was in K through half of my 3rd grade year. I was in a private Christian school. We left that because it didn't align with the family, basically. So I explored and dabbled throughout that time between really my youth through my teenage years. When I turned 20, I did a dedication. I figured that I had learned enough at that point in time. I had read enough. Nobody had taught or trained me in this specific manner, but my mother had taught me a lot of these divination techniques and some of that approach to grounding and other magical implementation. So at 20, I did a dedication ritual. I cobbled it together from various sources that I had been reading. I had attended a Celtic pantheon at one point in time that worked at that time. It doesn't fit with my journey anymore as it's progressed along. Now that I'm practicing celestial witchcraft related to astrology, that kind of a thing. And then that dedication ritual, and then every 11 years, I'm doing a rededication of that initial dedication that I did.
Okay. And how does one become a member of the church, and is there a process for members to move up into clerical positions?
Yes. To become part of the church, really, we want you to just come hang out with us, would be the easiest way to phrase that. You should get an idea of who we are. We are really, it's important to have transparency and accountability. And so you should be able to freely enter. And this is kind of why the SBOTs exist. In part is that it's a pretty low stakes role to kind of jump in and be a part of something that's not as high magic as you'd be getting with a Sabbat. Because we realized that a lot of groups start with like, let's do a Sabbat, we're open to the public. I'm like, that requires a lot of knowledge that you're putting the burden on lay people. And that's not really the most accessible place to start. So an SBOT is a little more accessible. We see in about 2 to 3 months, we usually see a conversion rate from non-member to a member at that point in time. And so they can purchase a membership. It's an annual thing. We also have a 3-month split up of those payments and 6 months, so that we make it accessible. So it's not, if there's some financial burden. We also have, in the coffers enough that if it's really a financial barrier, we want to make sure that that's not something that's going to block you from being able to access those things. From that point, usually somebody will come to us and ask to be a deacon, which is where we start at, and that's a rising deacon position, because we have permanent deacons that have no interest in further clergy roles within the church, and they just want to be at that kind of intro space. The rising deacon is going to go through approximately a year. It kind of depends on how fast, and I won't delve into great detail about all of the nitty gritty. We can share it; it's not a problem. But the rising deacon is then, we're talking about figuring out what their praxis is, what they're learning, what they're training, whether they have a system or tradition, developing their own, a whole host of different things. And in presentation, demonstrating how they interface with the laity and the clergy themselves, attending meetings, that sort of a thing. And that kind of progresses them up to the priestess, and then from there going on to bishopry and then cardinal, and then that's kind of the end of the goal. And then once you're up at that point, running for hierophant at some point.
Right on. How would you characterize the Church of Witchcraft's identity in relation to broader paganism or other witchcraft traditions? Is it primarily like an out-of-court system or unitarian? What's the approach to it?
Our general mission is to revitalize witchcraft under a flexible common practice. And that is really looking at the behaviors that are endemic to witches pretty much across the board. So, for example, pretty much every single witch, I don't know of any of them that don't believe in magic. If you don't believe in magic, I'm not sure how you could pursue witchcraft. I feel like that might be a little tricky. Things like most witches are going to have an altar or a shrine of some kind. They just all will. All of them are going to practice spells or divination of some kind. What kind that is completely up to them, and that's part of our role in facilitating that. So the closest way to put that would be a Unitarian witch, I suppose, because even if your religion, for example, is Wicca, and you practice witchcraft through Wicca's lens of understanding, that's still acceptable by the Church of Witchcraft because of the reason that it's still your faith, your belief, and your unique path. And it's one way to kind of get a centralized place. And from that, if we have individual witches that come in, maybe they'll be able to find a group of people that are like-minded and start a coven if they so chose, with support from us as well. So that, because coven stead and coven structure is really complicated. And, a lot of people just kind of start with no guidance whatsoever. And kudos to you if you're able to get that done. But like, if I had somebody when I was starting a coven, which still exists shockingly, if I had somebody to help me explain what is a structure, what kind of bylaws do you need, what does it look like when you're interacting and soliciting donations, for example, how do you deal with people? Do you want a structure of some kind? And what happens if one of you gets sick? Your leader's gone, you only have one. Now what do you do? Right? None of those were things that I had direct answers to. And so the Church of Witchcraft can kind of provide a framework starting a coven if they so want to, so they can continue on their path and that we don't blockade that and help them in their unique journey. So really trying to get that centralized funnel.
Awesome. Let's see. My next question. So you've emphasized kind of a Unitarian approach and kind of this flexible common practice, as well as, the antithetical to dogmatic practices. Given that many pagan traditions and witches have deeply established liturgies, especially with specific deity invocations and structurized rituals, how does the church coalesce and harmonize those diverse liturgical needs?
We give the opportunity for clergy members, for example, these people that have some of this knowledge of their own practice, their own orthodox, their own orthopraxy, whether it's their own system or tradition or one that they've ascribed themselves to host these esbats as well as host any of the sabbats. Depending on rank, you may or may not have assistance with that. Mostly just so that, if you're a rising deacon and you need to run a sabbat, you probably haven't done that. You may want some assistance to do that. But that gives a chance to showcase some of those aspects of your specific system or tradition that is in play. And so we encourage that to happen. We also look broadly at multicultural sources as we develop some more of the teaching arm of the Church of Witchcraft. We're looking at some of those. What does the region look like that you're practicing? What does a family tradition look like? Because your region, your timeline, the family you're with, what area of the world you're in is going to broadly vary across that. And this is how I end up mostly looking at the behavioral aspect, because behaviors are very similar across them, even if their deities are different and their approaches are different. Mostly the ethics and morals seem to align, and there doesn't seem to be too much feedback or interference with one over the other, because they're all pretty much aligned to sort of that understanding of wanting to progress and that overall sense of camaraderie and forward progress versus just destruction and chaos, wanting to break everything down. And pretty much any system that or tradition that's in that kind of ideology of community, camaraderie, structure, forward progress meshes pretty well, because we're not identifying any one way to do it.
Okay. As the Hierophant, what does your day-to-day look like as a leader of a pagan church?
Wow, yeah, that is, all of us are volunteers, number one. So we appreciate everybody's patience with us when it takes us way longer than we expected it to get back to people. So thank you to those who have reached out to us, and it's taken us a while to get back to you. We try to do it within 48 hours because we're all pretty much every one of us holds a full-time job in conjunction with this. And interwoven throughout my day is responses to emails and questions and that sort of thing. A good portion of when I don't have a lot of inquiries coming in from email or phone calls is spent on preparing sermons and writing those, researching what a sermon even is. Specifically, do I have that book immediately available? No, I do not. But there are several books that I use to learn about sermon drafting, sermon writing, and how they can be approached in a multicultural way. From that, that day-to-day stuff incorporates my whole life is just interwoven with these kinds of approaches. Every single night I have prayer to my specific branch of witchcraft, and so I'm working with that every evening. I'm researching, I'm reading all of these things and that kind of thing, so it widely varies on what I'm doing.
Awesome.
I'm going to jump in. We have a comment. Well, we have a couple of comments. One is from a Facebook comment. I'm going to post it in here. Just give me a second. How did you see the structure of Hayfont in your title? Or how did you use it? Sorry. Let me put it up for you. There you go.
Do you want me to answer that one first, or do you want me to answer the other one?
It does. Yeah, I answered that one first. That'd be fine. I think that one popped in just when I was getting the other one from Facebook.
Hierophant comes from the Tarot readings, essentially. So that guide, that knowledge keeper, that kind of a thing. And it's something that I'm acting more as a steward for knowledge and or witchcraft. I am one way, not the way. And that's the same thing we tell everybody that we're engaged with or that is part of our church, is that we want to facilitate their unique approach as well. I think that if that answers your question.
Okay, I have to see what they say because they're on Facebook. Okay, another question. Okay, we got one from audience. How do you differentiate between Wicca and witchcraft? When you speak of witchcraft, are generalizing a magic practice, or is there a spiritual foundation to your view of witchcraft?
First off, thank you for watching, Wendy. I appreciate hearing from you as always. We have very fascinating backgrounds for both of us, and I always appreciate your input. Differentiate between Wicca and witchcraft. Wicca has a stronger approach to duality, a male and female unity that is going on there, and the interplay between those two aspects, as far as I understand it. They are far more focused on earth elemental or nature-based this planet sort of functioning, right? There is a metaphysical component to that, but a lot of that is about centered around those cycles and the movements of this planet. And I think that those cycles probably underpin most witchcraft, as far as I can tell. Of what cycle you're paying attention to is going to differ, I think, though. But Wicca specifically, coming from out of the Gardner stuff and then on through to the Farrars and then into the Frosts and that kind of lineage that goes on down through there with and I think that nature also comes from some of the druidry that happened with Gardner and his hanging out with the druids. I think that really shaped a lot of his innermost practices there. And then to your second question, when I speak of witchcraft, am I generalizing a magical practice, or is there a spiritual foundation to your view of witchcraft? I'm trying to get my head around this question. So witchcraft is, like it says, a craft of its own kind, right? It is a practice, and it is a magical practice of a kind. When you say a spiritual foundation to my view of witchcraft, I think I don't fully. Is there something more specific that you want to ask there?
I think they're getting at that there's many religions that practice witchcraft, but there's also like secular witchcraft, and I think they're asking, is there a particular religious basis behind the witchcraft or inlaid with the religious practice or with the witchcraft practice?
I think the Church of Witchcraft probably leans more towards a secular view of witchcraft. It does not condone the fact that that is a dogmatic truth of witchcraft. This is why, as a more of this broader branch of witchcraft, any of those branches may have a spiritual foundation to them, or they may have a varying. For example, if you're talking Lilithian pagan that practices witchcraft, or if you're talking something that's a satanic witch of some iteration, they are all going to have different cosmologies, divinities, and spiritualities attached to each one of those. For me specifically, I work more, like I said, with the celestial. So when I'm thinking about those astrological components to that, those are the underpinnings of my personal witchcraft. So my personal one specifically has a spiritual dimension to it. The Church of Witchcraft arguably has a metaphysical approach to it, but not necessarily spiritual. And that's why spiritual is sort of a broad term that's hard for me to really prize apart to make that clearer.
Okay. We have a few more from Facebook. Let me see here. Here we go. Do you have any classes that the community can take?
Right now, we don't have classes offered, but what we do have is something called our Embers program, and that's essentially a mentorship program, and that there's an interview process that happens. If somebody has interest in that, then they email us or they contact us, and then they have an intake of and that intake is really about what is it that you want to gain out of this. So it's from new witches to experienced witches, wherever that kind of falls. Then we have a better idea of how we can guide you, or if we can, because we don't have every single answer. We have a pretty good idea, and if we don't know, we kind of have an idea of where we could probably point you to figure out. If we don't know, we can probably find somebody that does know and point you in their direction. And we're not above saying, we don't know, or we're going to learn with you, or something along those lines. So it may end up being less of teacher-mentor. It could be a reciprocal partnership in that way as well. And that way we preserve the unique structure of that. When you do the initial intake, we'll pair you with a clergy member that's available. And then from there, we're answering those questions and trying to stay on the path of what it is you're looking for.
Okay. And we got another last question that we got from Facebook here. Do you have initiations that someone can go through?
Again, we do. Boilerplate is the basic way that I would phrase that. So we have a way that if you wanted to become a witch of some kind, then yes, we could do a boilerplate answer for you. We would work with you, though, to guide you into what it is you're searching for. It may start looking kind of like the rising deacon to priestess line of study, really, because of the reason that some of that is going to be part of your answer that you're going to need if you're going to be initiated as a witch, because it's not just, oh, we can just do this today. That's fine, but I think you will lose some of that gravitas to what you're doing with initiation. If you're just saying, I'm a witch and we initiated you, I don't feel like there's enough weight behind that without the underlying, what we reference as daemonology. And made that a little more clear that daemonology we're using as the counterpart, or let's just say counterpart to theology. So if we hear theology, that's what we're referencing as daemonology. And that is that underlying practice of your orthodoxy, your orthopraxy, what you believe, how you believe, who you're reading, what your initiation is. And we also can't stand in the way of specific traditions. We can't give you Wiccan initiation. We're not fully Wiccan. We can point you to who to go to for that, but that's not in our purview to do on their behalf. We could be a part of it if they're willing to do so, and it's not a closed tradition of some kind.
We got 2 more here, and then Nick, is back to you. Okay, so from Wendy, does the church consider itself pagan?
When I hear the word pagan, I think of nature-based belief. I would say that yes, the Church of Witchcraft would be pagan in its origin, or at least its underpinning. Even mine specifically, Celestial Witchcraft, is this nature-based? I would argue yes. Is it of this earth? Not entirely, but I still think that's still within our natural realm, if you will, something that is in this physical, tangible space that we're all within. Can I go to Neptune and touch it? No. But we know that it exists. We have observations that can confirm this, and lots of those kinds of things. And so I would still classify that as nature-based. It still has impact here. It still has meaning and influence in that way. So I would say that, yes, the Church of Witchcraft is pagan at its heart.
Okay, and the last one, I just think it's just a comment, not really a question to you, by Sir Galahad. The source of magic only responds to the pure of the heart ring of the Magi. So I think that was just a comment. He just, I don't think it's a question.
It does align with some of our thinking too. We have something known as the first altar. The first altar is the altar of the self. And this had to do with bodily autonomy, is where this originated from. I've had this preached back at me, and it's a very strange moment to have your own sermons preached at you when, other people holding you accountable. Even the guy who's supposed to be running the show, they can go, hey, are you practicing what you preach? And I'm like, dang it, you're right. The first altar is the altar of the self. The magic is coming through the witch, or translated through the witch, and then reconfigured in a way, and then expressed outwardly. And only the self is necessary for that, and that same alignment happens. We generally will use an altar or shrine or something along these lines. That's what I would classify as really the second altar. It's this outboard sort of manipulatable field that has good representation for what you're doing, and there can be very important causality within the behavior within using an altar or a shrine in that way. But the first altar being, you have to be aligned with yourself. The magic comes from you, through you, stems through you, and this attaches to that bodily autonomy. Because if we are instruments of our own religious faith, then it would be much more difficult to legislate said religious tool, if you will.
Okay, and I think we're back to you, Nick, for...
Yep. So we've talked about sermons quite a bit. Can you walk us through, like, somebody who's attending one of these, what does that look like? Kind of what do you cover in those?
I'll have to go back in my brain now. There's a whole bunch. I just did one. When I talk about these, there's 2 varieties of sermons that I really go into. It's either inductive or deductive, right? So either I'm going to give you some information and then I'm just going to talk at you about something, or it's going to be inductive. I'm going to lead the congregation through discovery of a certain topic, or help them arrive at a specific conclusion. Either one, there's usually about halfway through an interactable element in many of the instances. I usually try to do every 2 to 3 of those have an interactive element to them where there's participation within that, or some initial thought on the participants' behalf, basically, or the attendants' behalf. Basic greetings and that kind of stuff. But topics that I can give as an example, one of the very first ones that I did had to do with altars. So just what is an altar? I also did a second one on an altar because of what happens when you can't have one. Where does that go? What is the first altar? Topics like the Esbats and Sabbats. What are those, and why do we even do them? I boldly, as I've been getting more comfortable with this over the last several years, because we have all of these up on our YouTube channel. They're recorded and then we post those, so they're accessible and they're watchable. Just put them on in the background. Right now there's about 36 hours of sermons available that you can watch or listen to. The topics can range. We just covered what is magic as an example, or influencing magic. Another one, the last one I just did, had to do with extranatural entities, covering deities and that kind of a thing. So we can it ranges from really simplistic, basic kind of stuff into some more of the advanced stuff. So talking about like orthodoxy and orthopraxy and witchcraft. What is demonology, for example, and how does this really put these things together? And it has to do, some of my inspiration comes from current issues that are occurring, challenges that have come up from the laity where they don't understand something or something wasn't clear enough for them. The next 3 that we are doing, well, I'll give you the first one because it's already published, but disillusion is going to be the next one. It's about breaking things down as part of and not many people have caught on to this yet, but there's actually a triptych. Pretty much every sermon sequence I do, there's a set of 3 that goes into every one of those. So disillusion is kicking off our next triptych of sermons. The last one had to do with influencing magic, what is magic, influencing magic, and then extranatural entities, those 3 specifically, because they all were tied together. And so similarly, this disillusion is kicking off the next triptych.
Right on. I think that's most of what we have for questions. So what else would you like to tell us about the church or yourself?
Okay. Well, first off, how much time do I have?
About 30 minutes?
Cool, that's good, because I told Chrissy that I am fully capable of, if I can speak on sermons for an hour and create this much content, I can talk for a very long time. I will try to keep it useful. And by all means, feel free to ask questions. So some of our initiatives, I think I'll talk about some of our initiatives and kind of what our definition is of which, and this may appeal to some people. I think that would probably be where I want to start, is how we classify what a witch is. This went through at least 2 iterations. The first one that we had was that a witch manifests internally and externally with intent. When we stopped and thought about it, about 6 months in, we realized that meant everyone. And it wasn't liberal. It was too liberal. It was too inclusive, and it captured way too many things and didn't honor the roles of some of these other practices that aren't necessarily witchcraft. And that was not sensitive enough to that initiative. Since that, we have talked about the 3 main definitions that we can find of what a witch is really by what they do. We kept the same one. They manifest internally and externally with intent. That's still there. The second part to this, part 2 of this, has to do with they partner with the liminal in some way. And we specifically use the term partner. We aren't into the whole subjugation kind of thing. If a witch is, we're not going to shame them for that. If that's their gig, sure, like by all means. Not everybody's going to be into that. So partnering with liminal, that in-between state. And the third is that they seek to increase their potency and efficacy. And I was very intentional with the synod about whether or not we want to use the word power versus potency. And potency just means the magnitude by which you can do something. Efficaciousness is just how effective is that which you are influencing. Power has some of those lashing kind of ties and those kinds of power dynamics that we really want to bring in that way, especially with the partnership comment about the liminal. So those 3 really started to show us generally what a witch is. And so, for example, Christians wouldn't fit this definition. They're not seeking to create their potency and efficacy, right? That doesn't match. If you talk about voodoo hoodoo, you're also not talking about increasing necessarily your potency and efficacy. You're influencing life or reality or those sorts of things and preserving and respecting their approach as well without lumping them in with just such a broad brush. And so we use that definition to give us an idea of kind of what witches do, and that helps us kind of identify whether or not this is a witchcraft practice of some kind. And most of the witchcraft practices that we've read about, British traditional witchcraft, Reconstructionist, all seems to fit pretty well underneath that, and we haven't come across any errors yet. But organizations, any religious organization, needs to adapt and change and listen to what their community is saying. If that doesn't fit or doesn't make sense, or if it doesn't match our goals, then we should revise that and talk about that as a community. As for initiatives, things that we're working on that we have continued to work on is the occult library. So we have various texts and things of that nature that we've been collating and trying to put together for people to access. And that's been an important function. We're working on it, but the Librarica interface will allow you to kind of see our whole collection in both states. And from there, as a full member, you're able to borrow those books, and we're still working on some of those finer parts of that so that there is accessible occult knowledge like that may not necessarily be attainable otherwise. We also are working towards a seminary program that is far off in the distance still because we are aiming for accredited, and that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of people. But we are working in that direction. We are aware that things like Cherry Hill Seminary exists. There are at least I forgot the other one. There's one other Wiccan seminary that I know that exists too. And both of those are Wiccan in orientation. The Temple of Witchcraft, Christopher Pinsick and his ilk, also great group, right? Magic users across the board, definitely witchcraft. But they all three of those have kind of their own approach to what they're doing with that. And so we wanted to have a broader scope of things that would incorporate things like your psychology behind things. How do you do witchcraft counseling? What does that even mean? What does Orthodox and Orthopraxy mean? What is the history of witchcraft in whatever region you're studying? And those are the kinds of things that are being thought of as the seminary is developing in that direction. And I think those two are the biggest pieces. I'll go ahead and pause because I do see another question there.
We have from our group, what is your YouTube channel?
That's a really good question. Let's see if the link is on our website. I know that for sure. But can you pull that link quickly?
Yeah,
Chrissy, by any chance?
Let's see. Got it. And is right here. Oop, we lost him.
I'm still here. Sorry about that.
Welcome back. It happens. It's got the weird thing where you jump off to a page and it boots you for some reason. But I got that link posted there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I also encourage people, please feel free to comment. We appreciate discourse. It's important to the process. I'm saying things out in the open, and people can say stuff about it. And they can have, as long as it's a collaborative, respectful discussion, well, I'm into it. I'm here for it. And then it looks like from your Facebook group that I said we do sermons, and why do we say sermon? Yes. For that, it's basically just a speech. It's typically religious in nature. It has some of those underpinnings to it. It also has to do with some of the observance of your own witchcraft and asking some of those trickier questions. And so sermons are just that religious discourse and the similar beliefs that we hold.
Oh, Chrissy, you're muted.
I'm sorry, that happens. Okay, I'm just going to say to you because I'm not a fast typer like everybody else here. Okay, so coming from a Facebook page, somebody's asking, how much do you think comes with the studies in your church versus creating the church in the craft?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. Let me get. Okay. Let me copy and paste it real fast on my Facebook. Okay, this is on our Facebook page that somebody's asking. And here it goes. There we go.
Let me read that real quick. I'm going to need some help kind of sussing this out. So how much do you think comes with the studies in the church versus creating the church in the craft?
Purpose and context. Because
Is that
brain doesn't process that one either.
I'm wondering if you study solitary study versus a church that's teaching. I'm not sure how to answer that exactly.
I think because they put something else in, and this is the same person about the sermons. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He was, because he or she, I'm not for sure which one it is, he was, or they, let's put they was saying that what you call them sermons, but are you actually teaching lessons where people can ask questions along with the sermons?
Well, it looks like now we have like 3 different questions there.
I can copy and paste that if you want me to.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out that first one. I think I might just pass on that one. I will answer it in the way that I think that it's being asked. If you're studying on your own,
let me just say a disclosure here. Since we don't really know, since you're not on Facebook, not on YouTube, we don't actually know what you're referring to. If you want to send me another Facebook on the page, send it to me and explain more. Okay, thank you. So
yeah, we need some more context there because that
need clarification.
Yeah,
that doesn't read right to form a rebuttal.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead and talk some more. One question I want to ask you is, okay, so you got 2 locations, one in Colorado and one in Nebraska. Are you thinking about opening up any more locations, like in Iowa or maybe Western Nebraska or anything?
that is a great question. I don't want to overstress where the church is because it's a volunteer organization. There's only so many of us, and I think that in my past, I have had run organizations where I expanded too aggressively. It worked really well, and then I got burned out because I was the only one really capable of doing all of those. I had 4 different locations that I was overseeing that had to do with martial arts, and it was incredibly difficult to do that because every weekend I was traveling a ridiculous amount of time, so I would be really scattered in that way. I have not with Nebraska, Lincoln specifically. So Lincoln, Nebraska, comes with its own barriers, shall we say. And that really comes down to attendance and awareness and that sort of thing. This is a very strongly religious area. trying to get word out is very difficult. I have not really I've not encountered this before. In Colorado, it's a lot more accepting. There's a lot more interest and intrigue. There's also not just in societal things, but overall religion or any religiosity of any kind, spiritual or otherwise, is waning. It is coming back, and it always comes in these kinds of hills and valleys. But trying to get people to ask these questions is really tricky, and wanting them to be there is really hard, especially in the difficult time that we live in now. And all times are difficult for different reasons, but this one specifically, there's a lot of more the ability to check out and disengage is more opportunistic and easy than it is to engage. And that's more where people end up at.
Okay.
And I do that question. So, to answer your question, Chrissy, right now it's going to stick to basically Colorado Springs, Denver areas in Colorado, and Lincoln, Nebraska is essentially the best way I can think of that is a missionary project at this point. Trying to bring it there.
Okay.
I see
So
this. Do you want to put that up, or did you have a follow-up question?
here's a follow. Here's a. I guess this is from the same person. Oh, this is from the same person, but they worded different. So, from a Facebook page, sermons deacons sounds like a Christian church. Do all churches of witchcraft have sermons and deacons?
We're the only Church of Witchcraft that I'm aware of. There's the Temple of Witchcraft that does exist. The Aquarius Tabernacle Church is another one that exists, primarily Wiccan in nature. They have their own hierarchical structure as well. They may or may not have sermons. I'm unfamiliar with that. I know of the Red Grail here in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm aware of them, and they have specific hierarchy as well. It's tied roughly or loosely to the Aquarius Tabernacle Church with a broad bent of Arthurian legend would be the way to phrase it, with inner and outer courts. And sermons and deacons, that sort of thing. Christians don't have a claim to a sermon. That is just something that we associate them with. Many religions have sermons and other teachings and guidings and that sort of thing. If you're talking about the Norse Asatru or the Odinic faith, for example, the Norse and Asatru are going to have a spoken lineage. And is that not also a form of sermon that's happening within the Norse Asatru and Odinic? Let's even go to the Native Americans or Indigenous Americans, if you will, depending on your preference. They also have an oral tradition, which is very much like a sermon. So sermon doesn't solely belong to the domain of Christianity.
Yeah, I think that what they're getting at is that the choice to specifically use sermon versus the other like tradition specific names, like for us in Norse paganism, like Symbol. But I mean, they're all still the same thing. I think that it's just they're stuck on terminology.
Mm-hmm. And some of that is the reclaiming. Like, for example, the claim that we can say we're a church, and that's okay. In fact, the Wiccans have the same thing. It's the church and school of Wicca. That's what it was founded as a church. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't use the same terminologies.
Okay, looks like we have a couple more questions here that came from Facebook group. What are your credentials? I think you already said that, didn't you?
I mean,
I think we mentioned that. I think you already mentioned that. No. You can answer that if you want. Of course.
It's a pernicious question, as they would answer this. It's a fair question, but pernicious. The reason I say that is because what are the credentials of anything, right? It's all a group truth of some iteration or other, right? We all ascribe as a group of people, and we say that person's going to do it, right? Essentially, a truth claim is made by a group. And the way that I ended up choosing, so I chose to make the Church of Witchcraft. I set it up all that way. I had people that I did this with. We had a debate about which one of us made the most sense to do this thing. And then when I chose to put myself forward in this role, it was in Colorado Springs, and I had my self-ordination, and that was 20 witches and or magic users, and 20 non-magic users and or other lay members that weren't necessarily part of the church. I made a vow to them of what to do, that my role was going to be, and then I've upheld that since that point. I in turn then ordained the first cardinals of the Church of Witchcraft themselves, and then they went forth from that point. Some of them have rescinded their title and are no longer with the church, mostly for personal reasons primarily, which is good because they need to step back if they don't feel like they're in a state of life that is supportive of the community, and they decided to retire themselves essentially, and we still hold them in esteem, but they have their own reasons. From that point, I have gone forward from that position forward.
Okay. And those are the last question we have before we wrap it up. From our Facebook group, who did you study under, and do you follow a tradition more or less?
Who did I study under? There's no one specific individual because I am primarily self-taught. Arguably, my mother would be the easiest person that would have taught me most of the divination aspects, as many of us have done. From there, it's been a variety of different authors, and that is pretty much many of the big names that you would hear: Eliphas Levi, Andrew Chumbley, Gardner, the Frost, so on and so forth, right? I could go on for a while. And their teachings and writings. There wasn't access to witchcraft where I was, and so I picked up the tools that I had. To get to celestial witchcraft, I took great pains to not be influenced by Jungian architecture. So I specifically avoided everything I could about every system that I could possibly avoid and dumped it all out of my brain onto paper. From that point, I have now determined that there are many things that correspond to specifically Babylonian and Sumerian traditions that I was not previously aware of, that I accidentally came across. The same thing happened with Hermetic principles. The Hermetic principles, I came across 5 of the 7 independently without ever having read Hermeticism. So that tells me I'm on the right track of some iteration, because I'm not the only one that apparently had these thoughts and arrived at the same conclusion without that kind of influence. So celestial witchcraft was my own system, is my own really tradition that I'm following, my own system. Tradition is another term that's going to be a little tricky to unravel, but that system was predicated on behavior. I looked at the roots of ritual, specifically that book. I looked at various anthropological sources, historical sources of what witches do, wise people, sages, seers, shamans, those kinds of things, and what they fulfilled in their roles and how they inspired their communities, and then kind of derived from there what would make sense in terms of a behavioral approach for orthodoxy and orthopraxy within the demonology of celestial witchcraft itself, to get a better sense of what that is.
That's all the questions we have that's on a Facebook group. But I have a question. Do you do anything in particular for like holidays or for the homeless or anything? And if so, can you tell us what it is?
When you're talking, I'm not sure if you want to connect do we do holidays? Is that just one thought? And then do we do anything for the homeless? Is that another thought? Or are those two things connected?
Yeah, do kind of like an example, because I know like with when I did Pagan Pride, and also with our covens, and you can ask Nick, we sometimes like give away Thanksgiving dinner or maybe some presents for the kiddies, and stuff, or coat drive, anything like that, to kind of like help out the unfortunate families and the homeless. So does the Church of Witchcraft do anything like that?
One of the outreach programs that we've been involved in is prison outreach. Strangely, for whatever reason, popped up on our plate and keeps coming up, but with some regularity. And they're like, for example, we had a prison reach out to us at one point in time, and they said, hey, we have some people who want to practice with runes. We can't give them this. We need X. And so that we provided those, and we did a donation drive for that. We have also done things for members when they're in crisis to some degree. We generally have a rule, we're not made of money, right? We're not an infinite resource organization. Usually if we get past the second iteration, if you need help and it's about the same thing, like I need help with food, right? Then we're going to start talking about, hey, it looks like this is a recurring thing for you. is there something that you want us to be more involved with? Can we get to the root of this? If not, that's your world. We can't continue to afford assistance in this way, but we can sort of figure out what might be a better root cause of this to sort of address that. When members are sick, we've done various things like soup cooking, that kind of thing, and brought it to them. We've bought groceries before for members and that kind of a thing too. So that's occurred. I guess that would be the best way I could answer that, if that assists if that answers kind of what you're asking.
Yes, it is. And thank you very much for that. We would take one more, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, because we're going up to the hour here. So this is from our Facebook here. So I think I got it down right. Okay. So let me put it up here. Okay, so has he studied OTO or Golden Dawn medical paths?
Interesting that it's phrased that way, as a medical path. I don't know if I would classify either of those as medical in nature. It depends on kind of what you mean by medical. If it's about the holistic nature of the well-being of the self and mentally speaking, sure. As for the Golden Dawn, I have looked at some of their teachings. The big black brick, right? The 7th edition of the Golden Dawn stuff that was by Israel Lagarde. Like, we've all probably read that. I'm still working through some of that because it is a dense book. I've looked at Book of the Law. I've looked at some of the history behind that. I've looked at some of the Thelemic stuff, as well as some of the Theosophical Society by Blavatsky's stuff as well. And so some of that is within at least my knowledge pool. Is it my specialty? No. But I do see that there is an overlap between some of the planetary sigil work that is done within the Golden Dawn that does, like, for example, the planetary squares and sigils, those sorts of things do have some correlation to what I do. I don't tend to use planetary squares, but there is definitely some overlap. Like, you'll see astrology sort of flourish in many different occult technologies, those different divination traditions and that kind of a thing.
Very magical. So before we end, do you have anything else you want to say that we or the audience has not touched base on?
No, I think that a lot of those questions are really the right ones to be asking. I really, in my time with as the Hierophant in this church, I want to inspire critical thinking. And that is what a lot of this is critical thought behind whatever it is you guys are asking, and questioning me. It's important. I'm not above other people, right? Like, I just have the title to basically help the organization stay on the rails, so it doesn't fly off into space and we don't get anything done and we become useless for other people. So keep critically thinking. Feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us in a variety of different ways. Please feel free to connect to our Discord as well. We have conversations there. And if you have more questions, we are happy to set up a time to talk to you one-on-one as well. So if you have other questions, then we're happy to answer those too.
Okay.
And you can find all of those links at the Church of Witchcraft below.
Yes.
Yeah. Please check it out. If you're near the Lincoln area, you know, I'm sure he'd be happy to see your face. Just let him know that you saw him on Within the Cauldron, and you just want to check out the church. So, and thank you again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, and maybe if you have anything else that's coming up in the near future that you want to promote, just let us know, and we will help you promote it. So just stay for a few minutes, and everybody else subscribe, share, and like while we end. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Stay blessed.
Great Goddess, I am so thankful to have you guiding me, protecting me. I am so thankful to have you guiding me, protecting me. I am Great Goddess, I am so thankful to have